Good morning. I'm making this short video to document my latest approach to doing forms. Here we have a form, and what you can see if we try to run it, we get a bunch of error messages, and if we actually type in some stuff like new career goal, and then we have a slug. Let's use a pre-existing slug because that's useful to see, and we don't have any interests. Then what we can see when we add, this error message goes away, but this error message actually indicates that that slug is already defined and that we have to find a new one. And then interest, we have to select at least a couple value, or at least one value, let's say. More information has to be something. Description has to be something, and then we add, we get a new career goal. So if we go down to the end, you can see it down there. Okay, so how do we implement this feature of making sure the required fields are required? If I go here, I'll start off by saying the meteor example form was my last best effort at building form values, but I figured out a few things that I could do better. As you can see, I've got these if statements and so forth. So let me go to the way I do it now. Here's the HTML, and what you can see is at the top for all forms we have to have indicate either success or error. A string either success or we have to embed the string success or the string error at the top of the form in order for Semantic UI to decide whether or not to display a success message or a failure message. So here's an example of a success message that will only display when success is true. The problem is that if error is up here, it will display every single error message class, and we only want to display the messages that actually have errors. And so I solved this now with a sub-template called form error message, and that's really simple. All it does is say it gets passed an argument called error message. If error message is not the empty string, then it will actually result in this div being in there. Okay, and so that's whoops. So you can see how I use that. After every input type, I have the space where I want my error message to be, and the error message argument is passed by invoking this field error helper with the name of the field. And that's one difference in my new one, is that what I do now is field error now returns the actual error message string, and to do that you invoke this thing called key error message with the error object that is found inside the invalid keys. Okay, so the notion is that after you do validation, there's going to be some or all fields which will be invalid. Well, there might be zero, but if there are some, what will happen is the field error will look up, figure out whether or not there is an error message associated with it, and if there is, if it's erroneous or not, and that's determined by seeing if error object is a non-null value. So it finds this object, and then if that object exists, then it's going to return the result of constructing the error message associated with it. And so if I look at what you need to do to understand this part of it is in Aldeed simple schema, they have this notion of validation messages. You add a validation message to a simple schema instant, and what it is, it's basically an object that has an error type and then the string, and the string can take variables basically. So for example, the required error type, when you construct the error message for it, figures out what the label is and says label is required. So what I'm going to do now this is the way I do the slug thing, is I construct a custom message for that. So you can see up here, what I do is I say for slug, okay, I specify the custom field and I supply a function which is going to be run in addition to the validators associated with this other stuff to determine whether or not the slug has already been defined. And so slug field validator, if it returns, well, I have it return true if the way these validators work is if they return a string, then that indicates an error. If they return anything else, that indicates there is no error. And so what I have this function do is return the error type duplicate slug if the slug is already defined. Otherwise, I return true, indicating there was no problem. And so then what I have to do is define one of these messages that indicates when the error type is duplicate slug, what should the message be? And the message should be the slug, and the value of whatever the user supplied is already defined. So once I have that, then what happens is this code will return the appropriate constructed message, default constructed message that simple schema uses in the case of everything but when you supply a duplicate slug, and then it will return this custom message. Okay, so that's the first kind of cool thing that's that I provide. And what's nice about this is that in the in Meteor example form, okay, I hard coded what the values, the error messages should be, and this new approach allows kind of total flexibility. You can decide, you can return. So for example, the slug thing, the slug can actually return two messages. One message when you didn't supply a slug, and then it says slug needs to be supplied. And then if you do supply a slug and the slug has been defined, it provides a different error message indicating that. So that's really nice. And then the other thing that I do is I used to have a reactive dict and key values and so forth, and it actually turns out to be simpler for this kind of thing to just create two reactive vars. These two reactive vars are either the empty string or the string success and error, indicating what should be put into the widget up here. So success class is either going to be the empty string, so it doesn't exist, or it will be the string success, and that will indicate whether or not to in the case of success, to display this particular div. Okay, I think that's about all. You can see that success class is just going to return the value of the success class reactive var. Error class does that. Field error returns the actual string that should be displayed as an error, or nothing, or undefined if it's not. Interest just returns, this is just for making that selector. Then we move down here, we extract the contents of the fields in the standard way. All this stuff is actually totally, kind of the way it was before, except for these two lines down here where we set the success class and error class variables appropriately. Okay, so take a look at this. If you have any questions, let me know. I think this is, if you have better ways or simpler ways to do this. Oh, I should say that one last thing. Of course, I have this form error message. I already talked about that. Form error message is here, and it looks like this message right here. So let me know if you see issues or ways to improve upon this.